Guys, I know a lot of y'all have been waiting through this all day. I know I have. It's an honor to get to introduce this next person that's going to come up and talk. Congressman Harriet Hageman is a nationally recognized property rights attorney. Representative Hageman is serving her second term representing the great state of Wyoming in Congress. She has spent decades confronting radical environmental lawfare and now brings that fight directly to the halls of Congress. Representative Hageman is widely regarded as one of the most effective and principled leaders defending private property rights today. Help me welcome onto the stage Representative Harriet Hageman.
Thank you. Do we have the other one?
Thank you. Do you want to sit on this side? That side?
No, you're good. Okay. All right, well, Harriet's in the house.
Thank you, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You know, I think I've shared this story with some of our people in our audience, but I'm going to say it again for those who haven't heard it. So we have a really good member, and he meets with a lot of members. He meets with a lot of politicians at very high levels. And so one time in DC, we had a meeting with you, and so I asked, do you want to go to the meeting? And so he came with us, and we had a fabulous meeting, of course. And we walk out, and his comment was, well, we just went from a Chevy to a Rolls Royce.
That's very sweet.
Well, okay, so you are fresh off the plane from DC.
I am.
So let's just start into this. Tell us what's going on in DC, what's top of your mind.
So as you probably saw, we've done 11 of the 12 appropriations bills, which that is the first time in decades that that's actually happened, where they have passed through both the House and the Senate and been signed into law by the president. Why that's significant is because now if we have to do continuing resolutions in the future, it will be based upon Republican budgets. And so it is going to be more conservative. We have cut spending. We cut $1.5 trillion in spending with the reconciliation package last July. And to the extent that we didn't cut spending with some of the agencies, we at least kept them flat. One of the agencies that we did cut quite extensively was within the State Department and Foreign Affairs. We cut 16% from that particular agency budget, thereby reducing the amount of money that can go to the UN. And then we also stripped a lot of the programs out of the UN that I think probably many of you in this room cannot even believe we were spending money on those in the first place, including many of them associated with climate change and global warming, like the gentleman before us was just talking about. Right now, there is a partial shutdown. Well, there will be a partial shutdown as of tomorrow morning with Department of Homeland Security. It makes no sense that the Democrats have done this, and the reason that I say that is that the Department of Homeland Security, we fully funded for 4 years in our reconciliation package. So ICE and all of the border enforcement and security, all of that will continue to go forward. What they're going to be impacting now are FEMA, TSA, some of those agencies. So this is not a good situation that we're in. One other thing, just yesterday, in terms of highway safety and protecting our truck drivers, yesterday I dropped a bill to address what are called chameleon truckers. I know that's important for our cattle haulers. I've been working with the American Trucking Association, Wyoming Trucking Association, and other trucking associations across the country. Last week in Indiana, there was a horrific accident involving an illegal truck driver who was not English language proficient. He killed 4 men in one accident. These chameleon truck drivers are going circumventing to avoid being detected, and I dropped a bill yesterday that I'm hoping that we can get passed quite quickly and start taking more of these chameleon trucking companies off the road.
That's great. Very good. So since we're talking about bills you've dropped, I want to list off a few of my favorites. Sunsetting conservation easements.
Yes.
Yep. No net gain of federal lands. Country of origin.
Yes.
Animal ID.
Yes.
Repealing the Sustains Act. That's a
Yes.
big one as well. Let's talk about conservation easements. We were just having this conversation out in the hall, but you know, for those of you who know Dan and I, if you've known Dan longer than me, he actually was one of the first advocates against conservation easements in Texas. And yeah, a lot of people didn't like him because he was very unpopular when he came out against it. And as an organization, it's something that we absolutely have opposed for obvious reasons. But, we feel like we're pretty educated on it. We don't hold anything to Harriet because she's read many contracts. So just give us a lowdown on your reason why you oppose conservation easements.
So I don't oppose conservation easements, but I do oppose perpetual conservation easements. I do believe that individuals can make the decision for themselves of what they're going to do with their land, and they can work with a stock growers association land trust. But the way that I put it is, how would we feel if people from 1692 were dictating how we use land today? Why should we be able to dictate how land is used in 2561? It doesn't make any sense. It's why for hundreds and hundreds of years there's a common law concept called the rule against perpetuities. And essentially for any decision that relates to real property, you have a life in existence plus 21 years. Really complicated way of saying, maybe about 75 years makes sense for somebody to be making decisions about real property. But beyond that, we do not want the dead hand of the grave controlling how we use real property. It is far too important for every generation to be able to make policy decisions, and I mean both the landowner, the local communities, to be able to make decisions about land use. And I'll just give you a couple of examples just in the forefront of my mind that we were visiting about out front. I had a situation where in 1962 there was an easement called the Lusby easement granted to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department on the North Platte River in what is now the Miracle Mile. It wasn't called that then, but the Miracle Mile is the #1 blue ribbon fishery in North America, if not one of the top ones in the entire world. It's in central Wyoming. It's below a couple of reservoirs, and that's the reason why it's such an incredible fishery, because we're able to release water as needed. Well, this conservation easement was sold to Game and Fish Department in 1962 for $10,000. I was born in 1962. $10,000 was quite a bit of money. Today, $10,000 ain't much. Yet that easement is perpetual and will last until ostensibly the end of time. And why that concerns me is every generation should be able to get the conservation values of those properties. They took that $10,000, that one-time payment, and no generation after that will ever benefit from the public access to those lands. And I think that every generation ought to pay for that benefit. It's for the communities, for tax purposes, for all of those things. But just by doing that 60-some years ago, they've changed the value of that property forever. So when people say, I should be able to decide what I can do with my land, hey, I'm a private property rights advocate, one of the strongest in the country. But you shouldn't be able to dictate what other people do, and other generations ought to be able to have the same opportunities that you do. The other thing is that I have read a lot of conservation easement contracts, and there is a poison pill in every single one that I've seen. And this is what the poison pill is. When you read the contracts, it'll say, the purpose of this contract is to protect the conservation or environmental value of this property. And traditional farming and ranching activities are compatible with the conservation or environmental value of this property at this time. Meaning that at some point in the future, if the people who control that conservation easement determine that your farming and ranching activities are no longer compatible with protecting the environmental values of that property, they can stop you from doing it. You also are entering into a contract with the IRS. The reason that the IRS is involved and conservation easements are valuable is because you're getting a tax break by the amount of the loss in value that your property is realizing. Rule of thumb, if you've got a $500,000 ranch, about 50% of that is lost the moment you put a permanent conservation easement, a perpetual conservation easement on the property. So again, we're taking the value out of these assets that are typically the most important assets that people own. And I'm not sure that the people selling this are being entirely upfront as to what the real impact is on you in the long term. And just one last thing, I lived through Jimmy Carter. I lived through what we had with the high interest rates and the high inflation in the late 70s and early 80s. The only ranchers and farmers that survived were the ones that had equity in their property and a banker who was willing to take a chance or keep taking a chance on them. You knock 50% of the value, you knock 50% of the equity out of the property you own, we go into another one of those circumstances, you're going to see people losing their farms and ranches left and right because they've got conservation easements on them.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary. So your bill would sunset them after 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
One generation. And you can re-up them. The family can go ahead and re-enter into other ones. I'm not trying to prevent them from doing that. And it might end up being multi-generational, but I do believe every generation should pay for the benefit of being able to use private lands.
Yeah, absolutely. That is also an issue that states can pass, and we'd love it here in Texas if that was something that we would do, is pass that, a sunset clause here in Texas. And other states ought to think about that as well. I know Craig Records Group has been working through ALEC trying to get that done. But that's something to push. Okay, so I want to, when we won the election, which was a great day, I mean, it's been a year.
Yes, it has.
That's pretty remarkable. So 30 by 30 got rolled back, NACS got rolled back on day one. I mean, there were so many good things that the administration did. But the Biden administration had put a lot of things in place. And one of them are those land use plans, the BLM land use plans, and they got a lot of new land resource plans put in place and finalized before the new Trump administration. And those land use plans are there forever unless you litigate them. However, you found a way to undo those. So let's tell the audience what you're doing on that.
So one of the things that I have always advocated for before I came to Congress was the fact that Congress has largely abdicated its responsibility for legislating. And they've turned a lot of that over to the administrative agencies and unelected bureaucrats. So one of the tasks that I am taking on right now, because of August Pfluger from here in Texas, he is the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, and he appointed me as the chairman of the task force, the Article 1 task force. So one of the things that I focus on a lot is ways in which we can constrain agency power and make sure that we're the ones that are making the decisions, because we're the ones that are accountable to you. I'm sitting here, not some, undersecretary of an undersecretary of an undersecretary in some agency in DC. We're the ones that have to be elected, and we need to be accountable to you. So one of the things that happened under Joe Biden was he had Tracy Stone Manning as the head of the BLM. Tracy Stone Manning is an eco-terrorist. In my opinion, she is an eco-terrorist who was involved in the 1990s with spiking trees, a group that was involved with spiking trees to stop logging in national forests. They put her as the head of the BLM. One of the things that she did was she adopted these horrific resource management plans that, like the Rock Springs district in Wyoming is an example, the Buffalo district in Wyoming is another example, the Miles City RMP is another example. Well, these things are, can be hundreds, if not thousands of pages long. They can be extremely restrictive of everything that you can do. And the Rock Springs district is over 3 million acres. And she dramatically constrained oil and gas development, rights of way, cattle grazing, recreation, everything that you can think of. So she also did that. Wyoming's the largest coal producer in the nation. They adopted the Buffalo RMP that stopped all coal mining in the Powder River Basin in Montana and Wyoming. Well, you can imagine they're doing this again for the global warming, climate change stuff, but you can imagine what that would do to us if we did not have access to coal. Just this last storm, it was oil and gas and coal that saved the day pretty much across the entire country. Wind and solar produced zero during those storms that happened just over the last couple of weeks. Well, we were trying to figure out, how do you undo this? If you do it administratively through the regular process, they're going to get sued, and this is going to take years to do. So we exercised for the first time in history what's called the Congressional Review Act. And the Congressional Review Act, let's say that there's an agency that adopts, a national speed limit, and we say we're not going to have a national speed limit. Congress can go in and undo that, but that's just one agency action. With these RMPs, they typically cross a lot of different issues. For the first time in history, we CRA'd an RMP. The first one we did was out of Montana, the Miles City RMP. We CRA'd it. Why it's significant is we only have to get 51 votes in the Senate. And it's automatically expedited. So the moment that we file a resolution for a CRA to undo an agency action, we only have so many days within which it has to be to go before the House and the Senate. We only need 51 votes. It goes straight to the president. So the first one was the Miles City RMP. The second one was the Buffalo RMP. We have nullified both of those. We've reversed both of those. And here's the kicker. They can never adopt a substantially similar regulation again. So we are now doing the third CRA, which has to do with a mining project in northern Minnesota. And I'm sure that I'm confident we're going to get this one through too. We've already done it in the House, it's over in the Senate. But they've stopped that mine. It's one of the most important mining regions that we have in the United States. And the enviros have successfully blocked them from being able to mine those resources for decades now. And now we're going to CRA that are the RMPs, and we're going to be able to open up northern Montana for additional mining as well. So really, it was the first time it was used. It's pretty exciting because it fundamentally changes the relationship between Congress and these unelected bureaucrats.
Yeah, that's very, very exciting. Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about endangered species. Now, the bill that was just passed out of markup, which does an awful lot of things, and we had about 8 amendments. No, it's about 7 amendments that we were trying to get in that. And our focus is, obviously, you guys know because you're our audience, but our focus is things that will help the small landowner. In other words, the things that will prevent the species from getting on the list that shouldn't be there to begin with, which is most of the species on the list. We were successful at the markup of getting in 2 really good provisions. And the one I remember when we first brought the amendment into your office, it was an amendment that Congress would approve along the same lines. Congress would approve any critical habitat designations for endangered species, and we brought it to you for 100,000 acres. And what did Representative Hageman do? She said, I want it 50,000.
So we reduced that.
So we reduced it, and that's what was added into the Westerman bill. So there is now an amendment in there that allows Congress to determine any critical habitat over 50,000 acres, which is really good. We were also able to get a provision in that requires them, when they do their determination analysis, to coordinate that with local, state, and tribes. And that's another key thing that we were able to get in. But talk about why that bill is important, because it does more things than that. But if you can explain, especially from the judicial perspective.
So there are a lot of, it is going to be renamed to the Endangered Species Recovery Act so that we are focusing on recovery rather than just keeping species on the list into perpetuity. And Margaret had your organization had phenomenal, ideas of more that we could do on the Endangered Species Act, but one of the challenges that we have is we have to get 7 votes in the U.S. Senate. So that is one of the challenges that we have. This was a bipartisan bill coming out of the House. I'm hoping we can get those 7 votes, but as you see, there's an awful lot of contention going on back in Washington, D.C. right now. But probably the biggest thing, so I filed, I'll use another example from my experience as a trial attorney. I filed my first lawsuit challenging the Fish and Wildlife Service over wolf introduction and management in 2002. I finally won that lawsuit in 2017. It took 15 years. And I think a lot of people thought I would never win it there. And we did, because we stayed on track throughout the entire thing. The recovery goal was X. We had met that. Wyoming's management plan was sufficient to protect a recovered population. That's the end of the discussion. And we just fought year after year after year after year. And eventually, the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. ruled in our favor. That's very important for Wyoming, and it's why we have fewer wolves than any of the other western states. because we're limited to about, well, our recovery goal is about 150 wolves. We probably have 300 to 350, but Montana and Idaho, because they have different plans, they're probably over 1,500 to 2,000 head of wolves in both states. We've been able to control the population, but we have protected a recovered population. What we have found is the litigation is always about the unknown. And what they can convince judges of is that if you delist the gray wolf, they're all going to die tomorrow. If you delist the grizzly bear, they're all going to die tomorrow. Wyoming's going to come in and they're going to hunt them into extinction within 36 hours. And you've got judges in Washington, D.C., in Montana, in California, in Washington, and Oregon that they will buy that nonsense. So what we always have to do is demonstrate that this is the states that are better at managing these species than the Fish and Wildlife Service. In fact, it's the states that do it anyway. Even if the grizzly bear is still listed, it's the state of Wyoming that has 9 employees and $50 million invested in grizzly recovery. Not the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they're probably less than $10,000 that they've invested in grizzlies. We've invested $50 million. We've invested $50 million. Do you think we're going to let them go extinct tomorrow? Hell no. That's just stupid. But we don't ever get approved that because the courts won't let us. So the key is you have to get them delisted, get them to state management, allow the states to manage these species with other species so that you have a more balanced approach, and we can demonstrate that we can protect these species in the long run. So what this bill does, and I think is probably some of the most important reform, is nobody can sue after a species is delisted for at least a certain number of years. That alone will stop the lawfare associated with the listing and relisting of species, because we'll be able to show Wyoming's done a good job of managing the gray wolf. Wyoming's done a good job of managing the grizzly, but with these apex predators, we have to be able to use management techniques that are going to allow us to not only manage those species, but other species, and protect our livestock industry as well. We have to look at this holistically, and we can't if we're managing for just one species. So those are some of the changes that we have made, is we're taking away the money-making aspect of the Endangered Species Act.
All right, let's switch gears again. And how about permitting reform, the NEPA bill?
The NEPA bill has also passed, and this is another one that there's a lot of the same kind of thing. It is purely a procedural statute. The court should not be dictating what we're doing. If I'm going to go build a dam, they shouldn't make me look at an alternative that doesn't include building a dam, right? I mean, if I'm building a dam, I should be able to build a dam, and I can mitigate the impacts of that, but I should still be able to build a dam. The way that NEPA has been distorted over the last 20 to 30 years is the judges come in, the environmental groups, and the judges come in and say, well, we don't want you to build a dam. Well, but I need a dam. Well, we're not going to let you. We're going to use NEPA to block you from being able to build a dam. We're returning to the basics of what NEPA is, which is an evaluation of the environmental impact of a particular project, not to stop all projects. The reality is that humans are part of the natural environment as well, and we've lost sight of that. We have lost sight of the fact that we are part of the natural environment as well. Our needs also must be considered. And if California needs to build dams to be able to meet the needs and demands of its citizens, we need to help them build dams. Or what other kinds of structures. So that the permitting reform is really to streamline what you have to do in terms of building these projects, and then also limiting, again, the lawfare that these enviro groups have become very wealthy on over the last 30 to 40 years by being able to stop projects through NEPA. It has made it through the House. It got bogged down in the Senate. I think that there's still optimism that we can get those 7 votes from the Democrats, but there's just a couple of things that have made them pretty skittish of voting on these things. So we'll see. I think it's probably the most significant. These are the most significant things we could do as the 119th Congress. We have got to be able to build the infrastructure that we need to take us into the future. I was reading, and I meant to bring the article when I came over here today, and I'm sorry that I forgot it. If you watch what's going on in Europe with this net zero nonsense, with the global warming and climate change nonsense, the leaders of those countries are destroying their ability for their citizens to survive what is coming. And they are destroying their economy. The second largest city in Germany a couple of months ago voted, they had a referendum and they voted to deindustrialize. It's one of the largest port cities in the country, and they have voted to deindustrialize. They are heading towards such incredible poverty in those countries because of these failed policies, and America cannot go down that same road. But the article I was going to bring over here is that our poorest state is Mississippi. The GDP of Europe is within only 2 points of, or Mississippi is within 2 points of the GDP of those European countries. Our poorest state, and our poorest state, Mississippi, is doing a lot of really innovative things, especially in the education sphere. I mean, they're really improving a lot of stuff. They're comparable to the economy in Europe, and that's the standard that is being set in that country. And it's why I fight these things as hard as I do, because I don't think it is my job to make people's lives miserable. I do not believe that it is government's responsibility to hurt you. But there are a lot of people who do, and you're seeing it play out in Australia, and you're seeing it play out in Europe. And that's why organizations like this are so incredibly important for advocacy, for education, for being back in Washington, D.C., and making sure that your voices are heard. Because as long as we're here, we're not going to allow them to do to us what they have done to the citizens in Europe.
All right, I think we should end on a really good note, and then we can open up for some questions. But one of the most important pieces of legislation was the One Big Beautiful Bill. It did so many things. Do you want to unpack a few of those things in there that you think our audience should be aware of?
Well, a couple of things. In the forest management, for example, one of the problems that we have, people are constantly talking about affordability. Yet your government works against you all the time. They make policy decisions that are absolutely 100% contrary to what is in your best interest. And I'll use forest management as an example of that. The National Forest System was created under the 1897 Organic Act, and it was created within the U.S. Department of Agriculture because it was seen as a commodity, not within the Department of Interior. And that's very significant because it was created for two purposes: a continuous supply of timber and a continuous supply of water. Wyoming's a headwater state. Obviously, both of those are incredibly important. But the reduction in the amount of timbering that we're allowed to do over the last 30 years has been dramatically impacted. Number one, by the roadless rule, which I have a bill to repeal that, but also just the horrible forest management decisions that have come out of Washington, D.C. So we watch it burn to the ground, but we're importing lumber from Canada to build homes. And it's had a huge impact on housing costs. That's one of them right there. It also has destroyed all of our timber companies. So even when we need to get in there to address fires, to try to build fire breaks, we don't have the equipment anymore to do it. I think we've only got 10 logging companies in the state of Wyoming. There used to be 50 to 60. And again, we're burning it to the ground, this resource to the ground. We have mandated a certain number of 20-year contracts for timber companies on our national forests. We have mandated certain numbers of permits being issued for logging in our national forests to try to get those numbers back up. That's going to help our timber companies to stay alive, and it produces a usable product that we all need. We did the same thing with in the energy sphere, forcing BLM, forcing these agencies to actually be leasing land. So I'm on the leasing for oil and gas development, coal, and that sort of thing. I'm on natural resources. And each of the different committees had assignments of how much money they could spend, or how much money they had to save, or how much revenue they would generate by the policies that we were adopting. In natural resources, we generated revenue for the U.S. Treasury by leasing for timber sales, cattle grazing, oil and gas, other mineral development, Trona. So we hardwired in this bill mandates to actually manage and use our resources over time. And I think that that's going to be one of the reasons why you're going to see a huge uptick in the economy this year. We've been kind of kicked around that President Trump policies are not working. It was going to take some time to do that. We also know the tax benefits. I don't think you ought to be sending all your money to Washington, D.C. And we did quite a few tax reforms. And I think that those are all going in the right direction. Sometimes you just got to kind of starve the beast. And as I said earlier, we cut $1.5 trillion in spending.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I think we can open it up for a few questions.
Yeah,
if Shad
okay,
is,
let's
if
take
Shad
a
is
few
ready.
questions. That we have two of the smartest women in America right here on our stage. So let's take some questions and put them in the hot seat.
Did you tell my brothers that the other night? That isn't what they said.
They said they agreed.
First of all, I want to thank you for the work you're doing for Wyoming and for the rest of us. We very much appreciate it. The question I have refers to the slide that Jason Isaac showed. The slide that Jason Isaac showed, where the DOE arbitrarily put a national interest electric transmission corridor in the mid part of the USA, primarily right now in Colorado and New Mexico. Does the Congressional Review Act, could that apply to that? Because it's an arbitrary corridor.
I'd have to look at that to see whether it would, but it sounds to me like it probably would. The thing that's good about the Congressional Review Act and why we were able to use it against an RMP, because the agencies never thought we could. The agencies never saw this coming. I'm sure that Tracy Stone Manning, I read some of her quotes after we CRA'd the Buffalo RMP. She was stunned that we were able to do it. She didn't think we would ever be able to do it. But it's essentially any agency action is subject to a CRA. So what I would do is I suggest that you get a hold of your own representative or then get a hold of our office and see if there is something that we could look at that. I don't know the answer to it.
Harriet,
We have some
Harriet.
information. May we give that to you directly? And
Sure.
Margaret knows the situation very
Yeah,
well.
but I was just going to say to your representative, you had to censure their representative at the end of last year in the
who
ESA
was-
hearing in Stansbury.
Oh, she said those words.
She said those words.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, she said very bad words.
She did.
Harriet was the chair at the time, and so she shut her down. She censored her.
I will admit that I kind of goaded her into that just a little bit.
I know, but she never saw it coming. She
Yeah.
just took the bait. But Bill and I were both sitting in the room, and we had a couple high fives in the back. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Okay.
Okay, my question is along the same line on the CRAs. We're having the same energy transmission problems here in Texas, and my biggest, thing that I don't like about it is the bill that passed went to planning in ERCOT, and ERCOT did the planning. PUC approved it. It did not go back to the legislator for approval on a project that's going to cost $33 billion. And I have an issue with that. Can we use those CRAs to go back?
Let me answer that one. So Joanna, the difference is that's a state law. So what she can handle is the federal law.
Okay.
With the CRAs. So that's
Well, that was
unfortunately,
my question. That's
yeah,
where I was going.
no.
Can we do this for state?
I know, it's such a good tool that she's developed that we would like to use it on everything. We
So it was
totally
a-
get that.
It was adopted in 1996 by Congress. So it was adopted, and I think they did it. That's when we had the Newt Gingrich revolution, and I think it was to try to stop the Clinton administration from the overregulation. And so it was adopted in 96, but it's not been used it's only been used like 30 times in the last 30 years. But we've done it a lot.
But we can't do it here.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, we've got the questions down here. Y'all are all quiet over here. You're going to have to get more active.
So many things I'd like to ask you, but I want to get to the CRA Act because I was around and working on it when that was enacted. And I'm curious as to how you're getting, as you say, it's been used very little, it's been vetoed when it's been done a lot. President Trump, I think, signed more of them than all the other presidents combined. But how, it has limits as to how far you can go back. So how are you overcoming that?
So it does, but there's a trigger. And under the Congressional Review Act statutes, the agency has to present their agency action to Congress for review. And if they don't, then that trigger never starts. So typically it's 60 days. So we could go back 20 years. And in fact, I'll be very honest with you, we've gone to the administration. We've gone to the appropriate agencies, and we have suggested that they go back and they look at all of these different agency actions that are bad, some of the bigger ones, and determine whether they were ever presented to Congress, because if they have not been presented to Congress, the 60-day deadline does not apply. The other thing that we did is we went to the GAO and we obtained a letter confirming that we had the authority to do this, that statutorily we could exercise the CRA this way. So if and when we are challenged, and I anticipate this may be challenged in court, although it's difficult to challenge an actual congressional action, but if it is challenged, we have a GAO letter that says that we have fully complied with the requirements of the CRA. So we're working with people to scour the last 20 to 30 years, because really that's been the explosion of administrative action in this country. It started during the New Deal, but it's the last 30 years that we have 99,000 pages a year in the Federal Register and things like that. So we're asking them to identify what are your big ones that you would like to get rid of, and let's see whether it was ever presented to Congress, and if it wasn't, we could still CRA it.
So the question I have is, in the late 1980s, grazing advisory boards were sunsetted out of FLPMA. Is there any way we can get them reinstated?
I don't have information about that, but I'm happy to take the information and see what we can do.
Okay, we got one more over here, Harriet.
Hi, Congresswoman. I understand that you are the chair of the Anti-Woke Caucus.
Yes.
Which, of course, is absolutely friendly in this crowd. I wondered if there's a lot of anti-car policies in our DOT regs that are woke. They are woke policies in transportation. I wondered if you would work with me on some amendments.
Sure.
For the upcoming reauthorization bill to get the woke out of transportation.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. The Anti-Woke Caucus really is to try to expose some of the horrific things that have been going on in this country. And in that area, I ended up being the chairman of that. So we've had some incredible presentations about what's happened in our schools, what's happening with our medical professionals, different things, trying to expose it and develop legislation to stop some of the nonsense that's going on.
So are you telling us they're not only trying to end our food supply, but now we have to take a wagon to work again? All right. Who else? Anybody else have any questions? One over here.
Well, while you're walking, can you give us any examples of some of the stuff you guys have uncovered that is crazy?
The over-sexualization of our children is real, and it's very dangerous. And I think that we just saw what happened in Canada is a byproduct of very failed policies. The man who was responsible for that horrible situation up there started taking drugs when he was 12 years old. And the medical intervention associated with this is so horrific, not only with the surgery, but the nature of the medication that they're putting these young people on. It is completely rewiring their brain. As you can imagine, I mean, I think about how we treat cattle, how we treat horses. You wouldn't do to an animal what they have done to children on some of these things. That's why I'm constantly fighting back against it. The issues of men and girls sports. We just had a hearing 2 weeks ago on that. And I got into a terrible 3-hour battle with the other side in the Judiciary Committee about we have to keep men out of women's sports and we should not allow men in the Olympics. And one of the issues that I brought up was the guy in the Paris Olympics from 2 years ago. And I said, it never occurred to me that we would watch the Olympics and watch men beat the hell out of a woman. And they all went insane and said, that's a woman, that's a woman. I'm like, you're crazy. You're just flat nuts. That is not a woman. And the next day he came out and admitted he's a man. So, it's just, those are the kinds of things. We've gone off the rails in terms of some of these social issues. The ESG that the gentleman before was talking about, that it's real. The environmental social governance. We have allowed that to get embedded into a lot of things that you think, how in the world did that get there? And we need to be pulling it out at every single level.
So hey, I have one more question about the CRA. We appreciate everything you guys are doing with that. It is a powerful tool. We're glad you're using it a lot more. I am concerned, though, that the Democrats will also use it. And the Trump administration has done a lot of great things on the regulatory front, like rescinding the roadless rule, rescinding the public lands rule, and many others, that if they don't get those finalized and completed and reported to you on time,
That's right.
then those will also be vulnerable to get reviewed. And so I'm curious if you're having discussions with the administration about what those deadlines are and what they need to get done and
Absolutely. Because then we'll have the 60 days to review, and if we don't do anything to nullify it, then it can't be brought back up under another administration. So that's one of the flip side of this is, for whatever regulation, whatever deregulatory action you take, we need to make sure that that is presented to Congress pursuant to the CRA, which is the appropriate way to do it. We'll let the 60 days lapse, and then that will be hardwired in. So the reversal of the endangerment finding, as you said, the reversal of the nullifying of the roadless rule, those are things that we'll make sure are presented to us pursuant to the CRA, and that way we'll be able to address that. We've also told them to go back and look. Are there other things that they did during the first Trump administration? Are there other regulations that we need to harden? They need to be looking at that to make sure that they get those to us so that we can protect them.
Thanks.
Congresswoman, as a property rights advocate, one of the things I'm curious about is 2 centuries ago, there was a reason why the federal government was the major landowner in the United States. We had the Louisiana Purchase, we bought Alaska from Russia, we did a lot of things. 250 years later, there is no excuse for the federal government being the largest landowner in the United States. And I don't understand why there's not a bigger movement to sell it for real estate development. Home ownership is an unrealistic dream for a lot of Americans. Low price of land could change that. You can earmark some of it for wetlands, for parks, for industry. We have $18 trillion of commitments coming to the United States. They need land for it. That would be a historic opportunity to do that. And every dollar that's earned from the sale of the land could go to reducing the federal deficit.
So that is something that is very controversial, is what I will put out there. But one of the reasons that I have been focusing on no net gain is that the federal government has been expanding its footprint, and we see it over and over again. That's the part that I can't figure out as well. We need to stop where we are, and that is the policy that I am approaching right now, or that I am pursuing right now. We shouldn't have the federal government. They just bought another 38,000 acre ranch in Wyoming. The BLM bought a 38,000 acre ranch in the state of Wyoming, southwest of Casper. Takes it off the property tax rolls, the impact of, they're not gonna run the same level of cattle. But the other part of it is these create barriers for young people to get into ag. And I don't think people truly understand that when you have to compete with the federal government for purchasing land, you are absolutely preventing our younger people from being able to become ranchers. And I know that's one of the things that you all were just talking about in Wyoming, is we need to find a way to reduce this. So another area of reform is CRP. I don't know, do you all have CRP down here in Texas? Well, that's another area that we have federalized our land by non-production, by non-development. And my county, Goshen County in Wyoming, it's $4 million in payments are made by the federal government to landowners every year under CRP. Well, now you can get more money for CRP than you can selling or leasing to your neighbor. I've got lots of nephews who are desperate for land. They're all ranchers. They're trying to find to buy more, to lease more, and they can't because it's in CRP. So I'm working with Brooke Rollins as well as G.T. Thompson, the chairman of the Ag Committee, to try to put some real reforms in place on CRP to even open up what our private land is for more development and use. So I think that those are the things that we're going to have to address that incrementally, but I think those are some of the things we need to just, let's not have the federal government expanding its footprint.
Congresswoman, thank you for being here. Secretary Wallins was here earlier today, and I didn't have a chance to ask her about this, but the National Animal ID program wherein we're tracking to some degree every cow and potentially every hog, every chicken in the United States. This is an issue that's been coming back like a seven-headed hydra for, 20 years now? You're a great advocate for Wyoming ranchers. What can we do at the state level, and what is being done at the federal level right now to thwart this? Because it's being sold as something that's good for national herd health and for public health, but in the wrong hands, you know where this can also go.
I know where it's going, and that's why I fought as hard against it as I have. I'm perfectly fine with voluntary EID, but when it becomes mandatory is when they can also control you. And we've seen that in Ireland. In Ireland, the EID, within 18 months, they issued their first cull order to slaughter 41,000 head of cattle. They didn't go forward with it because it was so controversial, but their first order was to kill 41,000 head of cattle because of global warming. You got a $100 a head tax in Denmark, same thing, because of global warming. The only way that they can do it is if they know where the cows are. So in the wrong hands, this is yet another way of controlling us. And we've known, I mean, you used to kind of be, you'd think, are they really doing this? Does this really make sense? Or am I just getting a little conspiracy theory here? And it's not. I'm going to get a t-shirt that says, does anybody have any spare conspiracy theories? Because all of mine have come true. And this is an example of that. Oh no, we're not trying to control, what you can do. It is for disease traceability, and then the next thing is for all these other purposes. And so I continue to fight that. I have a bill to block them from making it mandatory, and I'll continue to fight that. I've been working with Secretary Rollins. I've made it clear that this is an important issue. I'd say the USDA is about split 50-50. There are about 50% of them who think it's a great idea and 50% who don't. The couple of things that a lot of people don't understand, though, is it isn't 100% of cattle or buffalo. It is only those that are going to be taken across state lines. And what I'm trying to advocate for, and it would be great if Texas would jump on board, that you could have state-specific bags tags. And then if you're going to have, if you've got a replacement heifer that you're going to keep in your herd for the next 8 to 10 years, you shouldn't have to put an EID on it. If somebody wants to buy it and take it across the state line, they can put an EID on it then. But there is no reason at all that you should have to do it, and that's actually what the regulation says. It's only for interstate, in movement across interstate lines. So this is only supposed to apply to about 11% of the cattle herds, and that's one of the reasons why. The other thing, and Texas is in better shape than Wyoming is, because you guys have the ability to have, you've got your packing facilities. We don't in Wyoming. If they don't cross the state line, again, you can have an intrastate herd entirely and not have to do EID. I think as many people who can push back on that is great. The other thing you could do is enter into MOUs with other states that you will allow cattle from other states to cross the state line, even if they don't have EID. That's another option that may be possible too.
Yeah, that was a great point. And the EID leading to, in the Netherlands at least right now, $100 a head tax by 2040, or 2030, I'm sorry. So that's where this road is leading down to. So Carolyn?
Hi. Thank you for coming. I hope I can be a great a speaker as you guys are up there. You guys are wonderful with your words. I'm a rancher's wife, and the Kings, I got to talk to them a little bit. They had their ranch threatened that they were going to be taken away from them, and you guys were able to step in and help them. I come from in New Mexico, where grazing permits are just canceled. I have 3 neighbors whose permits had been canceled, and then the ranches are given to the neighbors for free. These are multi-million-dollar ranches. it's kind of the same situation as what your dad was in, where he owned the water rights, and then the government came in, and you went years in a court battle. Would the CRA, would it have helped her dad if you could have gone in and said, the Forest Service cannot violate state laws where you have to own the water in order to put cattle on?
That isn't the way that a CRA can be used. That is the adoption of a regulation or a rule, and then they attempt to implement that on a more programmatic basis. If there's issue with grazing leases, again, I don't know who you're representing. You're in New Mexico, aren't you?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
Okay. As far as the grazing leases, and I don't know whether the state would, are these BLM leases or Forest Service leases?
These are National Forest.
They're
US
National Forest Service leases.
Permits, which is different
Permits,
than the lease. Yeah.
right, permits. I would suggest that they get a hold of, do they have a district ranger that they can talk to?
They don't understand. They come in saying, we don't have a grazing background. And
Okay.
they come in with a more military background. And they don't know that we had ranches here before there were national forests. And so they think it's more that they're the ones that give us the permit, so they're the ones that, like I wrote them a letter saying, the New Mexico law says if you don't own the waters, or if you don't own the waters, you aren't supposed to put cattle out there. And the New Mexico law says that you can post on the fence, hey, I already own these waters, you're not allowed to use them. These are for the people who've had their permits canceled. She wrote me back, the supervisor wrote me back saying, we can cancel your permit if you do that. Now that's an unreasonable.
Let me visit with you after this.
Oh, can I hug you? Thank you.
Sure.
Congressman, thank you for coming, or should I say Senator. I wish you well in your race. It was interesting to note, and I was talking to one of your Republican Central Committeemen from Wyoming, and I knew more about your running for Senate than he did. So it was, anyway, good news travels fast, at least in Idaho, maybe not in Wyoming. One of the other things I think we're talking about, ID stuff on EID tags. The other one that I see coming from the Forest Service, especially, and maybe the BLM, is the virtual fencing stuff, which is essentially the same thing. And they're touting that as a way to replace all of the pasture fences that we put in. In our country, most of them were put in the late 60s, early 70s with, now I forgot it, anyway, with the three pasture rotation system and stuff. And they have long since outlived their life. So rather than replacing no fences, they're telling us that we're going to put ear tags in all the cows and use virtual fencing. It does the same thing. Yeah. They know where the cows are, et cetera, and I haven't figured out how we stop that. But it would be something, I guess, to talk to the people in D.C. about, to do something with that.
I hadn't thought about that. I will now. Let me think through that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, that's a big deal right now, especially in Colorado, where they're in the southwest corner in the northwest New Mexico. They're forcing them to the virtual fencing, and as we turn the cattle out, bring the calves back, nobody's pairing up, everybody's lost. There's places, it just turns into a management nightmare. Anybody else? Where are we at? Debbie.
Hi, Debbie Bacigalupi, Northern California cattle rancher. Doug was my congressman, and he passed before UC Berkeley came out with their study on the whale backpack. which was in the biomass of the scat is over 92% of our cattle, not just our cattle, but Siskiyou County cattle. And I'm wondering when a species gets that habituated to, for example, cattle in this situation, and the state of California is doing nothing about it, is there any reprieve from the federal, is there any way the federal government can come in and say, wait, this has gotten out of control?
Did you say these were the wolves?
Yes, the whaleback pack.
Okay. You know, I could go through the history of that wolf introduction. It started in 1994, and they brought them into Wyoming and Idaho. And the idea was that that was supposed to be basically the nursery. Montana, they allowed the natural migration from Canada, but we're talking about Canadian gray wolves. This was done under what's called the Rule 10J of the Endangered Species Act, which they were non-essential experimental population, meaning they could be wiped out tomorrow and it wouldn't have an impact on the survivability of the species. That was the way in which they got their foot in the door with these states of bringing them in, and here we are now, 30 years later, and we've got this mess. But the DPS, or the Distinct Population Segment, was supposed to be Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and largely it was supposed to center around Yellowstone National Park. They continued to expand that into eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, and northern California, and then now they've got the foothold that they wanted. Same thing with grizzly bears, and that was the intent all along, in my opinion. In Wyoming, we had, it was in part the state, but it was largely, I represented 28 different organizations, and I just kept suing at every opportunity until, again, after 15 years, we won. But you don't have states that are on your side. You don't have, with California, Washington, and Oregon, you don't have anybody who's going to advocate for you with the federal government on this issue. And I'm sorry for that. I am very sorry for that. This has been a horrifically destructive program of what they did starting over 30 years ago. Doug was a great guy. I know how important this was to him. I wish that I could tell you that you're going to have an agency step in and try to protect you, but I don't know that I can promise that. What we can do is try to continue to talk to the federal agencies, but in large part, those are to be managed by the states now. And in Colorado, they released them, and it's been a wreck down there, up there, I guess, from here. You can't manage for an apex predator at the expense of everything else, and that's what they've done with grizzlies and gray wolves. I am sorry of what they've done to you, but it was the purpose from the beginning.
One more? Uno más. All right.
Yes, I'm wondering if the Trump administration and the Republican leadership like yourself in the Congress can use this affordability issue in a way that is beneficial for people who love private property. I'm thinking of maybe a Homestead Act to make property available for people to build houses, requiring the Forest Service to allow more timbering, requiring BLM to break up their ranch, their new ranch in Wyoming, for making it available to ranchers. In other words, come up with some really aggressive ideas in the name of affordability.
So in part, that is what was included in the reconciliation package. We did include quite a few of those metrics requiring leasing for oil and gas development, requiring the permits for both grazing as well as the timbering. So we did do that, and we need to probably get out there and message it better and more. That bill had so much stuff in it that it is hard to really keep people focused on what we did, but we definitely did that to try to make sure, and some permitting reform as well, and some of the Farm Bill was included in there. So I think that as this next 6 months kind of play out, I think that you're going to see that people are going to be feeling a lot better about the economy with, in part, what we did.
Harriet, I have one quick question concerning the mods and the kings and all of these federal overreaches on these property issues. How do we reconcile government authority in balance with states' rights. Because as we see a move to blue states and this overreach on private property rights, and now that we have a conservative presidency in there, and they want to help, how do we do that?
So I think that it is important that your governors, if you want to talk specifically with government to government type interaction, you guys have got a good governor to do some of that. And that's where I think a lot of that needs to be focused. You guys are, those of you from Texas, you're fortunate. You came into the Union in a very different way than the other Western states did. And as a result, you don't have the federal footprint that we do in Wyoming and other states. But you still need to work with the federal government on these issues. You know, I would like to say that the 10th Amendment is the solution to everything, but it isn't. I can say it. It says what it says. It ought to be enforced, but it's not. It's not. So we have to be pragmatic about it. We have to be pragmatic about what the states can ultimately do on some of these issues. We're chipping away. We're doing what we can. I'm hoping we can have another reconciliation package this year, while we still have the White House, the Senate, and the House. And I'm hoping that we have them after November. But I think we ought to be doing another reconciliation package. And part of the deregulatory agenda really is to return power to the states. The decisions that we made in the reconciliation package on Medicaid, for example. Medicaid is a state program. That is not a federal program. That is a state program, and it ought to be managed and implemented by the states. One of the things that happened after Obamacare is that the federal government started spending $9 on able-bodied adults with no dependent children for Medicaid for every dollar that they spent on your traditional population, on your traditional young pregnant mothers, seniors, people with disabilities. The federal government spends $9 on every able-bodied adult with no dependent children who is on Medicaid. $9 for every $1 on the traditional population. We let the states get away with dramatically expanding their welfare population by making these things available at the federal level, and we have to stop doing that.
Well, I, for one, want to thank you very much. Excellent session. Great questions. Thanks for coming.
Well, let me say, I think before we close, one of the things that I just want to say, well, first off, thank you for making time to do this, because I think you take off for Argentina tomorrow. No?
I couldn't go. Not
Okay.
Me. I couldn't
All right.
come here and do that vote.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You prioritized us.
Well,
all right. Wow.
they've also canceled.
Have they?
Been
Okay.
canceled because of the shutdown.
Okay,
So-
all right. Well, the thing that I think you guys can see, but this is, in my opinion, and I'm probably, Bill's here too, Bill Doppel's here too. He'd probably agree with me. He's right there. This is the most effective member of Congress. And I'll share this with you as well, because we go in and we talk to a lot of members, and I can't tell you how many members. We would pitch an idea, like a policy we think should happen, and usually their first question is, "What does Harriet think?" So anyway, you are a treasure to us, not just to Wyoming, but to all landowners. So thank you very much.
Thank you.